Hey friends, in today's video I want to share a really incredible place with you. It's called the Narcisse Snake Dens. They're here in Manitoba where I live, and they're an amazing natural phenomenon of the reptile world that people come from around the world to see these snakes. It's super cool, and we're going to do a tour of the site, and I'm going to tell you about the snake dens, the snakes, and about 2022 in specific. Let's go. So when you first get to the dens, you are greeted with this open area where you can stop and have a picnic, and a lot of families come here and spend the entire day. So it's a very much a tourist attraction, and Manitoba Conservation has done a great job of making this space friendly for tourists while also being safe for the snakes. The Narcisse Snake Dens are our second biggest natural tourist attraction outside of the Churchill polar bears, which I've never gone to see but definitely on my bucket list. At the dens, there's actually 5 dens right now, and these 5 dens have thousands upon thousands of snakes that live there. The area became a snake paradise because there's limestone underground, or I guess the ground is made of limestone, and over time water has eroded little canals into the limestone, and it's created underground sanctuaries that you can get below the frost line. Because remember, Manitoba is very cold in the winter. Reptiles need a way to survive if they're going to be up here. So the snakes found these sinkholes basically, and they have taken over for the winter. So the snakes gather in the fall and get into their dens, and that's where they're going to spend the winter. And in the spring, they all leave their dens, and that's the perfect time. They're all together, might as well breed. Now, if you have a den big enough, or say 5 dens in a small area, you end up with a lot of snakes all in one place at one time, all breeding. And so in a good year, the Narcisse Snake Dens are insanely busy with snakes. I'm going to link at the end to a documentary about the snake dens, because it is such an amazing phenomenon, and it's right in my backyard basically. I get to go see it, and I think it's such a cool thing. So I'm glad to share it with you. The snakes at the dens are called red-sided garter snakes. They are completely harmless, and they, in the spring especially, they have other things on their mind. They don't care about people. So it's become this place where you can interact with and observe thousands of snakes that are completely harmless. And it's this way for people to encounter nature that just blows my mind. You could probably tell I quite like the dens, and I'm really excited to share them with people. Every year I volunteer with the Manitoba Herpetocultural Society, which is our local herp society, and we go out to the dens and we educate the public. And it's just something I'm really passionate about, and so I'm really glad that I get to share this video with you. This is Den 1 that we're looking at right now, and it was basically the only den that was actually active this year. The problem with 2022 is that Manitoba has had huge amounts of flooding at the dens. Like, we just had a lot of rain, and the dens couldn't absorb that much that fast. so they flooded. And therefore the snakes, when they did come out, they all came out at different times depending on where they were hidden in the dens. And it's possible there was a big die-off. We're not actually sure at this point. As you can see, I did find some snakes while there, and I know how to catch them easily, so the most cool thing about this place is that random people can come here and interact with these wild snakes. So as a educational volunteer, I'll catch a snake and I'll show people how to handle it and how to be gentle and what is okay to bother and what isn't okay to bother, because you don't, if there's a mating ball, you don't touch those. Those are off limits. Big females, we try and keep those off limits. It's the little males, because there's so many of them and you don't need all of them active at the same time. They are the ones you're allowed to touch. So these are two little males that my sister and I caught. This is me showing the snake to a gentleman who was there, because again, people come from all over to see the snakes, and it was, I think, really disappointing to people this year that everything was so flooded out. There is a website called Nature North, and they keep us up to date on the dens. So, and like, it's a big enough deal that the local news covers what's going on in the dens during the spring, because thousands of people come out to these dens to see the snakes. And this year it was like, if you're gonna come out, don't expect to see much activity, wear your rubber boots, and yeah, it was very wet and kind of disappointing. We noticed as we were walking up to Den 1 here, there was a lot of deadfall, and I'm not sure if that's from the amount of flooding or if that's because we had drought 2 years in a row. Basically, Manitoba's had a really rough few years with the dens, and it shows. It's been hard on the snakes. The good news is, chances are they managed to come out in different areas. So, like, yes, we didn't have thousands of snakes at Narcisse right now, but chances are they were still able to come out just more spaced out. And next year, hopefully, we'll have a more normal year and see the thousands again. I do try and keep up to date with information on the dens. So right now, there's so many studies going on at these dens. It's absolutely incredible the amount of science that happens at these dens, because where else are you going to get to interact with thousands upon thousands of reptiles at once that are completely harmless? Like, it's the first study on snake pheromones happened at Narcisse. You probably saw as I was walking around, there's information placards. Manitoba Conservation has put up all these placards that tell people about the dens and why they're so important for us to protect. Oh, there's benches along the paths so that you can take a break and rest. The paths, I think it's about a 3-kilometer walk if you want to go see all the dens. And normally so they've kind of created a looped path, and then in the middle of that loop there's a path that goes through, and that goes to the newest den that opened up a few years back. Because again, these dens are sinkholes, and water continues to flow into the limestone. You continue to have a changing landscape here, and so there was this little sinkhole, and now it's turned into a new den, and every year we've seen more and more snakes using it. So here we are walking up to Den 2, and it is swamp. It is absolutely underwater. We have no idea. Den 2 is normally the most active den, and at this time, nobody really knows or has announced what happened to all the snakes here at Den 2. Did they come out later when it had dried up, like the other dens did? Did they find another way out? Or did some of them drown? And it's probably going to be a few years before we know the answer, because we haven't had this kind of flooding at the dens in any memory I have, and I've been doing the dens for 10-15 years. Now, we have had other periods of die-off. About 7 years ago, don't quote me on this, but we had a random die-off that nobody really knows what happened. It was just 1 year, snakes didn't seem to be there in the numbers they were at. And then for a few years after that, the snake numbers built up again and again. And then COVID hit and the droughts hit. You might be wondering what happened during COVID times at the snake dens. And the answer is Manitoba Conservation shut the dens down to tourists because obviously we were all staying home and trying to be safe. And so the only ones who were there were people performing scientific studies. So it was a very interesting look into what happens at this natural tourist attraction when there's no tourists. How does that change behavior in the snakes? And how does it change behavior in the ecosystem? And we have some of those answers. While humans were away, the birds became more comfortable with picking off the snakes. When there's thousands of tourists around, the snakes are actually more protected because the birds move in and they have easy food. The main predator of the snakes during this time is birds of prey. Especially like crows and magpies. They really like the snake's liver. It's packed full of nutrients, so they will just come out here and it's a smorgasbord for them. So the tourists being out while the snakes are breeding actually helps protect the snakes, which I thought was very cool. It's very rare that humans have a good impact on a species, so I thought that was really cool. So if you enjoyed that little bit of lake view there that we had, Kortny, my sister, was with me and was willing to cross the lake. Normally people would walk up to one side of the lake, turn around and go back around the other. I call it a lake. It's just flooding. It's the field flooded and the den flooded, and it created a break in the circle, so you couldn't do the full lap without literally walking through knee-high water. That's again not normal. Normally in the spring this field is like a little bit soft. The snakes like living in swampy areas because their main prey is things like frogs, toads, tadpoles, So basically anything around the water. They'll also eat literally anything they can catch, but it's all tiny things. A garter snake would eat like a nest of rodents, but their main prey is not rodents. It's small amphibians, fish, minnows. I don't know the whole list of it, but basically the snakes are completely harmless to anything bigger than a minnow. And their worst thing that the snakes can do to you is they musk, and they create a smell, and it's pretty gross smell, and that's how they defend themselves. So if you ever do go to Narcisse, bring along some hand sanitizer. Mouse was also along for the walk. He likes going on these adventures. The Narcisse Snake Dens are dog friendly, but your dogs have to be on a leash. You may have noticed Mouse was off leash crossing the lake, but Kortny put him back on leash right away after the lake, and what else can I tell you about the dens while we're doing this walk around? So the flooded part was den 2, and now the loop is walking towards den 3. I went out a few times in 2022, and the dens 3 and 4, the first time I went out, den 3 was the most active. The second time I went out on this walk, den 1 was the most active. Oh, there I am, sitting there just enjoying the bit of nature. Yeah, people come out here to do bird watching and just nature walks. It's a really lovely area that's well maintained, and it doesn't often have the thousands upon thousands of tourists, but peak season is spring. We do the May long weekend, Mother's Day weekend. A bunch of schools in the area do like school trips during the week. Normally in a non-pandemic year, you have, again, tourists from around the world, and so tourist buses just show up. Manitoba Conservation during the peak season in spring has conservation workers out, and they'll give information about the dens. They'll make sure that you're following the rules. And what else can I tell you about the dens while we're out walking? People are always asking things like, do they bite? Yes, anything with a mouth can bite, but one, the garter snakes are very unlikely to at this time of year because their brain is on something else. And two, they even if they did bite, what's it gonna do? It's gonna give you a tiny scratch or something. It's their mouths are itty bitty and their teeth are even smaller. They're entirely harmless, so you are welcome to touch them. You just kind of clean your hands afterwards. Interestingly, when you're approaching a den where there's mating behavior, you can smell the snake pheromones. Garter snakes are very driven by pheromones. For example, so they all disperse in the spring out into the fields where they get their food. And then over the summer, they're out at any kind of swampy areas. You'll find them just on your farms everywhere. And the mums will have their babies out in the fields. And the babies don't come back the first year. They actually stay. They find little, maybe they'll hide in your shed or something like that, and that's where they'll wait out the first year. Or small dens, small caverns, squirrel holes, etc. But the adults, at some point, and nobody knows exactly what triggers it, at some point the adults, or maybe someone knows and I just haven't heard yet, but at some point the adults realize it's time to go back to the dens. And the first ones, as they're going, they leave a pheromone trail. And then any other garter snake that comes across one of these trails turns and goes back to the dens with the snakes. So they follow these pheromone trails that say, it's time to go home, it's time to go home. And the snakes will use the same dens year after year after year. And there's so much about the dens that I could say. There's so the garter snakes gather into mating balls, and that's what makes the dens so famous. Is one female, which are the larger ones, will produce a pheromone that says, hey, I'm ready to breed, and then the males will follow along her and rub their bodies up against her. And I'm not talking 1 or 2 males, I'm talking 50 to 100 males all gathering on this one female. And it's called a mating ball, and sometimes you'll see these balls literally go tumbling down the sides of the dens. It's basically really cool. And again, the documentaries that I link at the end will probably show some of that footage if you want to see it. Oh, here we are coming up to Den 3. The dens themselves are fenced off, so you're not allowed to go into the actual den and interfere with the actual breeding. But when the snakes leave the dens, as long as it's the single males, that's when you're allowed to pick them up. And we teach the kids how to pick them up, and it creates this... God, when I go out to the dens and volunteer, you're literally changing the minds of thousands of people, because they come here and they're like, snakes, ooh, scary, I've heard it's really interesting, but I'm scared. And then they get to interact with these wild snakes and just experience this amazing bit of nature. And usually by the end of it, I've got the people absolutely loving the snakes. They're holding them, they're just in love. They want to know more about pet snakes. They want to know what to do to help conserve the snakes. Speaking of conservation, so I'm helping out the Manitoba Herpetocultural Society, as I said, and we are hoping to do some conservation work with red-sided garter snakes this year. So if you're in or around Manitoba, or you want to support the Narcisse Snake Dens, look us up at mbherp.ca, and the website's just starting out. Please bear with us as we build this up, but we've got a goal to do some really cool things with the snakes this year. And what else can I say? I am in contact with the Manitoba conservation officers who, maintain the site, and whenever I talk with them, I get some updates. I might go back in the fall because I'm really interested to see how many come back. I assume there's going to be quite a few scientists trying to study the effects of the flooding this year. It is just beautiful out here. Even without there being a lot of snakes, it was a lovely time to come out and just be around nature. Manitoba, we're really lucky to have this bit of nature protected and maintained. I hope everyone who's been out to Narcisse really appreciates what a cool place this is. I think we're getting towards the end of our walk here, and let's see if I had anything else I wanted to add to information. Oh, yeah, I was gonna point out that, so in Manitoba, the wading through the water that Kortny did is safe, because the most dangerous thing in our water is things like leeches. Whereas I would not recommend you do this wading through water if you were, say, in Florida. It's pretty cool to live somewhere where we do have reptiles and can interact with reptiles, and they're not dangerous to us. So, we do have some things that are annoying, though, like ticks. I think Kortny ended up with about a dozen or so ticks between her and Mouse. I had none, despite going through the brush, so Kortny, thank you for your sacrifice in going through that water. Apparently it resulted in you getting covered in gross little bugs. Oh, I wanted to mention too, my walk through the path, I cut out parts where I was around people as much as possible, because aside from the people at the one den, I didn't have permission to film them. So it's not actually as dead as my video makes it look. I went out in a really quiet time at the start of the day, and I made sure not to film people as much as possible. So that's why it seems really quiet. I hope you just enjoy the bit of nature in the background. And there was some really big anthills. I enjoyed seeing them. And Kortny kept getting Mouse to go into the water or the in the lake there, because it was good for cooling him off. It was a pretty warm day. Hopefully y'all are enjoying this look into the Narcisse Snake Dens this year. Thank you very much for hanging out with me, and y'all have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.